Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 21. My guest, Scott Ratliff. Scott is a five-time professional lacrosse all-star who currently plays for the Archers Lacrosse Club in the Premier Lacrosse League. He won a national championship as a lead member of the Loyola University men's lacrosse team in 2012, has been a two-time finalist for the PLL Long-Stick-Midfielder of the Year, and was awarded the 2019 Welles Crowther Humanitarian Award. Scott is the co-founder of the Give and Go Foundation, a nonprofit organization that delivers free lacrosse instruction, equipment, and continuing education to empower underserved communities across the globe. On top of never missing a single game in all 8 professional seasons, Scott's consistency and commitment to causes greater than himself shines through his work off the field as a leadership consultant. Based out of Atlanta, Georgia, where Scott grew up. I'm excited to have him share his story and perspective on here. So without further ado, Scott, thank you so much for making the time.
My man, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So one of the main and many reasons that I have you on here is because I love your constant spreading of messages about gratitude, love, positivity. Where would you say you developed that kind of attitude and outlook? And who were some of your main influences on your way from childhood to your young adult years?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, it's hard sometimes, I think, to pinpoint when the flip really switched around wanting to kind of share those messages. I mean, I think that the obvious answer, right, is my parents and my sister, you know, just my family growing up. I think my mom in particular always kind of preached the importance of optimism and positive thinking, and more so than preached it, I think really is what she did is she demonstrated it for both my sister Danielle and I. So I think the seeds were started to plant there, but it really wasn't until my adult life that I became like really passionate about speaking on those topics and sharing that publicly. And that was, I guess, about 5 years ago now. I'd finished school at Loyola, and I worked in banking. I lived in Manhattan for a couple of years, and was trying to sort through that whole work in finance. And I was playing, in the MLL for the Cannons at the time. And that was like a major shift in my life. I kind of made the decision to leave banking behind and move home to Atlanta. And my priority was playing. So I wanted to figure out a way where I could be really focused on being a professional lacrosse player and try to, put my best foot forward there and, go after making a Team USA and becoming an all-star and a lot of those different things. And when I did that, I started kind of coaching high school locally here in Atlanta and coaching some club lacrosse, obviously, at that time to pay the bills and allow me to have a stick in my hands. And as I was entering into that world, again, my mom had just retired from her corporate job and started her own consulting business with a partner. And it was a leadership development firm. And, essentially the idea there was she had a partner named Dr. Jill Kahn, who was in holistic healing. And so my mom and Dr. Kahn had worked together actually a couple of times. First, my mom was sick and fighting disease and worked with her to help get healthy. And then my uncle ended up getting sick with cancer and unfortunately fought for about 5 years, but lost that battle. And throughout that time, a lot of the things that Dr. Kahn was teaching my mom, she was kind of putting her corporate hat on and saying, like, this is essentially the best leadership development program I've ever seen. And so them two together started formulating this program and created this company. And the timing really worked up where as soon as I moved back to Atlanta, they were kind of starting that. And I knew I had interest in leadership development. I never really planned on being like a lacrosse coach full-time or long-term. That was something that was kind of just a bridge for me to be able to focus on playing. So, it's kind of could be a really long story to get into the weeds of it, but I essentially started working with Dr. Kahn, and more so than learning this to teach it to others, I was applying it in my own life. At the time I was living with an ex-girlfriend and going through like a really tough breakup. I mentioned Team USA. I'd just gotten cut from Team USA, which was a big goal of mine and a big piece of adversity at that time in my life. So I had some things that I was really trying to work through. And as I started to like dive into personal development and inner work and kind of figuring myself out, that's, I think, where that passion for me to start to share a lot of that, came from. I think I found a lot of that gratitude that you speak of in my own life in that time as I was going through some of those things. And, I learned some strategies and some ways of like looking and framing my life and the world that really helped me to, I think, become happier and live with less stress. And also certainly to like succeed and to accomplish more. So once I really got good in my own skin with a lot of that stuff, that's when I kind of stepped out and started sharing it across my social platforms and started teaching it with the leadership development work I do now.
I absolutely love it. Do you mind sharing with listeners what like a holistic healing is all about, or kind of just like the short anecdote about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I really can't speak on the healing aspect. I mean, I've never worked with patients, and that's something that was always in Dr. Jill's lane. But what I like learned from it was, in the simplest terms, stress can kill you, right? And when we we go through our lives and we don't confront the things that are hurting us emotionally, that can turn into physical ailment. So amongst, a lot of things that goes into holistic healing, diet and all of that, the part of it that I was focused on were how do our thoughts and the way that we're, thinking about the circumstances around us, how are they affecting, our health and our ability to show up for our lives in the best way possible. And, that's when it really became clear. One of the things that she would always preach was, right, we're never going to be able to control our circumstances or the world around us. So, lesson one or step one in this is, learning how to focus, really inward and on your response and your reaction to the circumstances that go on in your life, as opposed to always kind of wanting to control things outside of ourselves. And where Dr. Jill really started with this was her husband had brain cancer. And what she realized was the first year or two that her husband was fighting this disease, she was making herself sick, trying to do every little thing to get him to heal. And she's getting so frustrated when he's, breaking his diet or doing something. And she had this, I guess, this aha moment where it was like, holy cow, if I don't take care of myself, I'm never going to be able to show up and take care of him. Right. So she learned that, the hard way, and fast forward, he's fine and he healed and recovered. And then she took a lot of those things she learned through that experience and brought it out into the world. And I was lucky enough to get to work with her closely at that time.
I love it, man. Thank you for sharing that. One of my mentors, Dr. Rob Gilbert, we do this stress reduction course that we teach the students at Montclair State University together. And he starts it off with a bang. He says, we're not going to die. We're going to kill ourselves. And that obviously gets everybody alert, but it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. That stress can kill you. And one of the thoughts you provoked is when I was out with San Diego SEALs, we were working with the Navy SEAL, our character coach, and he hooked us up to a heart monitor and was showing us some breath work. And at the end of the exercise, he had us think about negative leadership or a relationship that we're not okay with, and look away from the screen as our heart starts to flutter. And what you see is our heart rate goes outside of uniformity. And you might not see it because there's not a one-to-one correlation, but I now wear my Whoop religiously and I'm tracking my heart rate variability. And you see Whoop put out a great article on 10 different things that can mess with your heart rate variability. Obviously hydration, sleep, travel, all these different things. But one of them that is so important is being around negative energy can really hurt you, harm you. Right? There's like a lot of neuromuscular and neurophysiological things that can happen to you from a heart rate variability standpoint that can kill you. I just wanted to make that point because it's like, you don't think stress is bad and you don't think being around complainers is bad and you don't think getting in this negative feedback loop is bad, like you preach, but it really can kill you in the long run and really deteriorate your health long term.
And I think like the big thing, a big recognition for me there was it's not for, and I've worked with, a number of right, people who have struggled with panic attacks and things like that. And it's rarely like some big event that triggers it. Maybe a big event will start it, but then as they go on through their life, it's little things. And so, what I call them is weights, right? And essentially, Dr. Joe would make the argument to me, life is binary. So every moment of every day either feels good or it doesn't feel good. And the moments that feel good, we just lean into them and then keep doing them. And your thought response to moments that feel good is going to be a positive one because it's a good interaction. It's a good moment. But any moment that doesn't feel good, whether it's the heaviest weight in the world, like your family member gets cancer, or it's somebody cuts you off in traffic, or Starbucks, forgot my sweetener in my coffee this morning, like any little moment that's stressful, is a weight. And every time we confront a weight, you either pick it up and lift it and you get stronger, or you stick it in your pocket and you carry it around with you all day. So a lot of times it's this collection of little weights that ends up, we carry them around in our pocket all day until it gets so heavy that it weighs us down, where, and people who like yourself, right, who understand fitness, get this. The best way to handle it is to lift the light weights, because if you walk into a gym and you go up to a 500-pound squat rack and you've never lifted, it's going to crush you. But if you've lifted weights every single day and you pick up the light weights that you can handle and you use those to develop habits and to develop these skill sets, then when the really heavy weight gets thrown at you, you're strong enough to endure it and to try to kind of work through it. So it wasn't like, so many people wait for life to come falling down around them before they seek out help or this type of work of personal development. And that's one of the messages I really have is just, don't wait, right? Start lifting the weights now. Start lifting the light weights you can handle, because it doesn't matter who you are, how much privilege you come from. Inevitably, everybody's going to deal with heavy weights in life at some point or another. So instead of trying to prevent those from happening, the focus really should be on, making sure we're strong enough to handle it when that stuff does come.
I love it, Scott. And I think one of the things I always say is raise your rock bottom, right? That goes hand in hand with what you're saying on don't wait for it to get so bad. Change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than that of change, right? And I was listening to this podcast with Dr. Krista Scott Dixon. She was on a Finding Mastery podcast with Dr. Michael Gervais, sports psychologist. And she was talking about, and this goes metaphorically with your weights that you were talking about, change happens after 1,000 paper cuts. Right, when you just can't take it anymore. She does a great work in deep health and precision nutrition, the company that she works with. But one thing I loved about your story, Scott, is how powerful for you needed to use it yourself. And you became a problem solver in your own life. Blake Mikowski, the founder of Tom's, who he started 6 companies, but really he calls himself an entrepreneur because he just loves solving problems, right? You can start a company because you want to make money, or you can start a company because you see a problem that needs to be fixed. And that's what he did with Tom's. He put, for every pair of shoes you bought, he put it in somebody who didn't have shoes, right? So there's really something powerful on that. One of the things I loved about your story was I just thought you and I had an interest in leadership and in development, performance, and lacrosse. But now you worked in finance for 2 years, so did I, right? You have a sister, you have a supportive parents, right? You coach club lacrosse to get started and focus on lacrosse. There's a lot of through line and themes about what you and I are connected with. Could you share how you got involved in lacrosse? I mean, you're from a non-hotbed, right? So I think it's really powerful for people to understand the grit that you had to endure coming from a non-hotbed. And then and how did you get involved in the leadership come about? Was that just through your mother, or did you see that something deeper into lacrosse and performance?
Sure. Yeah. So I think those two things are kind of related. So my dad played lacrosse at the University of Maryland. He was there 1976 to 1979, which was like the heyday. He went to, I guess at Maryland, it's like always the heyday, but he went to 2 national championship games. He went to 4 Final Fours. He never was able to win one. So I love to remind him of that, because I've got the only ring in the household. But so that was like, like a lot of people, I think in this sport, I was born with it, right? I had a stick before I can walk, and I had somebody to teach me and to play catch with me in the yard from the time I was young. And I can remember, a few fun stories. Like one, right, I went through that phase where I wanted to try baseball out. So maybe I was in like 6th grade, something like that. And I'd go out for baseball, and, my dad, and he was never one to force me into don't play baseball or whatever. So he is, of course, being supportive. And he used to come out and pitch batting practice to like my baseball team with his lacrosse stick. So he had like the old school, like metal shaft, that bright red, like STX head, with the traditional stringing, but he would throw more strikes with that than any of the other coaches would with their arms. So he would pitch batting practice. So like, just an example of like, no matter what I did, he was using a lacrosse stick. So it was just always in front of me. And it was the one sport, I played all of them. Basketball was kind of the other one that I really loved, but lacrosse was the one that was just consistent for me throughout my entire life. I just always played. I was always excited about it. And so that was like a bond between him and I very much. And, my goals, and like, I can go back to, fifth grade, fourth grade, even before that, and seeing that I wrote down as like my future was, I'm going to play lacrosse, University of Maryland. I'm going to be a 2-time captain and a 2-time All-American. And that's what my dad was. He was a 2-time captain and a 2-time All-American. And so I just I used to visualize that and repeat that to myself over and over and over again as a kid. And so I bring that up because obviously, lacrosse wasn't very popular in Georgia. I mean, I had kids at my high school who were good friends with me who had never seen a game before, like never in their lives once watched it. I played in a youth league. There was like the only one really around in the city. It had 4 teams. So you would just play the same 4 teams over and over and over again. And so it wasn't like a huge sport, but it didn't feel so crazy to me because, again, I would come home and I had somebody to play with all the time. So I come up through the ranks and, my recruiting process was a little bit crazy. But I think the one thing that was never lost on me from those goals, even when I end up at Loyola, whatever else, was to be a captain. And that was something that my parents both really stressed to me, was the importance of being a great leader. So like my intro into leadership development work came much later when I moved home. And there's a good story there actually about how my mom really demonstrated what she did. But I think the seed was planted in just them encouraging me to pursue that goal of leadership from the time I was young. And I can actually remember when I got elected captain at Loyola, a box shows up and it's like this brand new pair of basketball shoes that I really wanted. And it's for my mom. And she had never given me a prize for winning anything in my life, but she just wanted to demonstrate being elected captain is a big deal and I'm really proud of you. And so it just stuck with me that they rewarded me for that. And so then just going forward from there, even on pro teams, it's not just the title. Obviously it really, the title is meaningless, but just the idea that it is important to see yourself as a leader and to try to step up and be a leader on the teams that you make. And that was really, I think, what drove me to, to always pursue that. And then probably to have interest in leadership off the field as well as I got older.
Yeah, and I love that you said that it doesn't have to do anything with the title. Your actions speak so loudly. I cannot hear a word you're saying is the quote that comes to mind there. Right. You're a man that's obviously built for others, right? I mean, I was so stoked for you when you won the Welles Crowther Humanitarian Award. Definitely deserving of that. You talk about your coming from a non-hotbed and having to play the same teams and same with me. When I was a freshman in high school, we didn't have a varsity program. So I feel that. And can you talk more about the Give and Go Foundation that you started? Because it probably has a lot to do with you being around not so much lacrosse or a hotbed yourself growing up. And what's the mission behind Give and Go Foundation? Why'd you start it and how is that going?
Yeah. So again, I do think I don't know if there was a direct correlation with being from Atlanta and starting that, but I do think there was seeds planted at a really young age of just coming from, just like you said, of an area that, most high schools didn't have teams and most people didn't take lacrosse seriously. And I was, I would guess probably like you, so far, I cared so much about it, right? And most of my teammates, it was kind of a side sport for fun for them. And that created problems for me at times in high school and beyond, where it was I would just get so frustrated that people didn't take what I was doing seriously or our sport seriously. So I do think that desire to grow the game really started there, where I just wanted, after going to Loyola and playing at a school where lacrosse was the biggest deal, and we'd have 4,000 student body population and 3,500 of them would be at the game. And so it was to me, it was this eye-opening, okay, this sport has arrived in certain places and I want to be able to bring it back to Atlanta. So that probably did have played a little bit of a role in the founding of Give and Go, but really that was a extremely organic journey and story for me. I had never even left the country besides maybe Mexico as a kid and went on a family vacation to the Bahamas or something. And I had turned 25 and I went to Japan with Matt Gibson and Joey Sankey, right? And I know you've done that and a lot of pros now have had that experience. And it was this, amazing experience of going and coaching in a different country and where they don't speak your language. And obviously just, the travel in itself is really special. But when you get to coach people that are from there and you meet people and you experience the country in a different way. And right when I finished that trip, I came home and not 2 weeks later, I'm back on another plane and I'm going with Adam Gittleman down to Managua, Nicaragua. And there's a existing nonprofit, Lacrosse Nations, that operates out of Managua. And, Managua is a really poor city, and Lacrosse Nations was started essentially just to provide lacrosse as an after school program for kids. So unlike Japan, where, they're looking to be coached to compete and play at the college level and national teams and all this stuff, this is like, look, it's, the goal here is just to provide these kids with an extracurricular activity which they have none of, right? And their parents are working, they can't hang with the kids after school. So a lot of these kids are just, they're doing nothing if they're not provided these opportunities. And Lacrosse Nations does a really, really amazing job. And Adam and I went down, we spent 6 days, we coached, all day for 5 straight days, and stayed with one of our hosts down there, this guy, Norman, who's kind of their on the ground director of all of it. And it was humbling. This guy speaks multiple languages. He's here for the kids every day. You go back to his house and he's got his entire family living in a really small home, like kind of plugged into the side of a hill there. And so seeing what he had come through Lacrosse Nations as a player, and it helped him to learn English, and it helped him to ultimately get this opportunity where now he works for this company, an American-based nonprofit, and all of a sudden he's coming to America and he's getting all of these kind of opportunities opened up. And we just saw really how impactful it could be. And then the other eye-opening thing about that was we posted a bunch of stuff on our social media, and they come back to us and said, we had our best fundraising week of the year this week that you two were here, because of the reach that you guys have to the lacrosse community to kind of tell the stories and show what we're doing. So that was when the light bulb went off, and we said, okay, like we both could feel this itch for travel. Like, we know that we want to continue to travel the world over the next couple years here, and this is how we want to do it. Like, it's more rewarding for you as the traveler to go somewhere and to give back to people in that community. And, again, you're going to meet people that way. You're going to find out more about, the local culture and way of life, as opposed to just bouncing around beach to beach and seeing the touristy spots or doing whatever you're going to do. So that was kind of the start of like, okay, let's figure out a way to formalize this. And as we worked through it, we just continued to travel. We ended up in Europe and ran a bunch of free clinics over there. And over there, we learned it's different problems, right? It's not, third world countries. And so the after school programs aren't as necessary, but the growth of the sport is still really constrained. And I actually tell people Europe right now very much reminds me of Atlanta when I was growing up. Like, there are people that play, there are leagues, there are pretty good numbers in all sorts of countries there, but they're just really limited in resources. Like, I didn't have a lacrosse store in Georgia growing up. Like, I would have to go to Sports Authority and play with factory strung heads. And, they really struggle to get balls. And obviously coaching is a massive problem. There's just not a lot of coaching there. And the people who do coach, a lot of great people, but they need to be trained a little bit on how to teach the game. So our mission when we go over there becomes very different than when we're in Managua, Nicaragua. But we still have this platform that can help. We can still raise money. We can still, use our contacts with equipment manufacturers. And so many of them have been great, whether it's String King or Warrior, STX. All of them have taken time to donate gear. And, a lot of times, right, they make heads that might be a centimeter off of the NCAA specs. And so instead of throwing them away, they'll give them to us, and then we can ship them to Italy, where, there's 2 teams worth of people who want to use it. And so the kind of the mission just started to grow organically there. And again, then all of a sudden we're back in Argentina, and now the problems we're back to, like, financially again, paying for field space and things like this. And they have this database of 400 players in Buenos Aires, but they're struggling to get organized. So as we traveled and we met more and more people that were running programs, the couple of things we looked for: one, where can we make the biggest impact, right? What are the places that are right on the brink of a sustainable lacrosse program that's going to be helpful for the people in that community? And then 2, what does that impact look like? Do they need money? Do they need coaches there on the ground coaching? Do they need equipment? Like, what is it that they need? And, looking at it through that lens, we just started kind of picking up initiative after initiative and supporting the programs that were best prepared to take the next step. And a lot of times what that is it's finding the person in that place who's on the ground, who is motivated, driven, ready to do the work. They just need resources, again, in the form of coaching. We've set up some college players to go take extended trips and coach in these different places. Obviously, we've gone ourselves. Is it in the form of, financial backing? Or is it, again, equipment is oftentimes a really big one. So that's kind of how that went. And it's really just taken on a life of its own. And it's been really fun because we get to stick our hands in a lot of different projects, and all of them are kind of unique. And more than that, we've built these incredible relationships with lacrosse ambassadors all over the world. I mean, upward of 20 countries that we've coached in, and pretty much in every one of those countries, there's, somebody on the ground there who sees how special the sport is. Most of the time the lacrosse community has shown up for that person in some way. They've been through something and they've seen the power of the lacrosse community, and then that motivates them to want to grow it in their community. And we can kind of just serve as a amplifying voice for those people and help make people in the States and Canada aware of what they're doing. And obviously, again, try to provide some resources when we can.
I absolutely love it. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's beyond charity work, in my opinion. I think it's a need, right? The same way we were talking about how stress can kill us earlier. I think there's a ripple effect by you doing that, right? That Nelson Mandela said sport has the power to change the world. I think what you guys are doing is so amazing. One of the articles that I am sharing with friends, clients, and otherwise is this New York Times article called The Zen of Weightlifting. And it really has nothing to do with weightlifting. It has everything to do with autonomy, belonging, and mastery. And I really can change it to the Zen of lacrosse, right? Because from you and I, it's about autonomy. Can we get better with our stick work? Mastery. Can we understand this thing to an unconscious level? And then belonging. You talked about the lacrosse community. I mean, it's how you and I know each other, but it's really a powerful community, right? When somebody goes down, there's donations and fundraising and awareness that really gets thrown that way. I do want to pull on the thread of hardship a little bit. You're helping out people that have a lot of hardship, either a lack of resources or limited resources, or don't have these same opportunities. But I want to go into your life, if that's okay. So a little bit more of a serious question. The sport of lacrosse has seemed to be good to you, from Loyola to the pros and all over the world. Do you mind sharing any lessons or stories of hardship or failure that you had inside the sport or along the way that perhaps helped shape to the amazing guy you are today?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there's so many examples I could go into. I guess the first one would be, I mentioned being cut from Team USA. And so, a hardship, it's tough for me to define it like that, right? Because it's just making a team. It's not, it's obviously not a life-altering event, but this was just a time when my relationship with the sport changed. And I think what specifically happened for me then was, I had this massive chip on my shoulder coming up, being the kid from Georgia, being undersized. I mean, I think all of us at Loyola, probably much like you guys at Yale, kind of had that. And I think that's what drove us to become champions, was a lot of us felt like we weren't recruited by these schools that were playing in the tournament and things like this. And so then I get into the pros and I'm leaning on that same chip. I have to prove myself. Nobody believes in me all the time. And eventually I have this breakout season, my third season. I'm starting to be recognized as one of the best players of the league. And I think what happened was, for a little bit there, my ego kind of got the best of me and inflated, more than the healthy amount that probably helped me to get there. I really saw myself as being one of the best players and the top guys. And I went into this tryout process with Team USA with this expectation of, I'm the best LSM, I'm going to make the team. And I don't think it was, I was still working my butt off, and I think I was still a good teammate and all these things. But I think I was maybe blind to some of the places that I could be better. Right. And, going through that process and getting cut at the end of it, and it just feeling like kind of blindsided and surprised by it, it hurt. And then I was left kind of sitting there, after that, wondering what am I doing? I put so much energy and time and effort into chasing this, reward essentially. And now that I didn't get it, it was like, well, what now? And I certainly don't think I was ever depressed, but I definitely was down on just the sport and my experience in it, and had a moment of adversity. But that came the same year that I had started working, with my mom's partner and learning a lot about personal development. So I did kind of have the tools to recognize, okay, what I need to redefine my relationship with the sport. If I'm playing it to chase awards, I'm never going to find fulfillment from it. I mean, I've won plenty. It's like no award is ever going to really give you that fulfillment, no matter how much you think it is. So my favorite author is Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, who's obviously a really popular book, but another book of his called The Pilgrimage, and he's looking for this sword to join this society, whatever. And the big lesson at the end is, the only reason for seeking a reward is to know what to do with it. And I like meditated on that line a lot because it just really resonated with me. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, the reward I'm seeking is making a Team USA or winning an MVP or winning a PLL championship of some sort, right? Like or I guess at that time it was MLL still, but what am I going to do with it if I win this award, right? Like I'm chasing something, but am I just going to win it and then I'm going to be fulfilled and satisfied? So the more I thought about that, what I really realized was what I wanted to do with it was use a platform. Like if I can make a Team USA or if I can be the best player in all of lacrosse, this is going to give me this platform to then share some of these personal development tools and skills that I have, or then to share, my relationship with the game, to share, how you mentioned how much I believe in love and the importance of talking about it and sharing it. And so I kind of redefined what I was playing for a little bit at that point. And it allowed me to still like have this drive to be the best. So I'm not saying that I no longer want to be the best player, or no longer want to win an MVP or win a championship, but it's why do I want to be the best player and win an MVP and win a championship? And when I got clear on that, I found a lot more joy back into the game. I think I became a better teammate. I think I became a better player. So that was like an experience that really, really helped me. And, that is all rooted in going back to the very beginning of this idea of weights, of seeing every like challenge as an opportunity, right? So if something doesn't go my way, as opposed to feeling sorry for myself or pointing the finger at the coaching staff, which a lot of guys love to do, or say it's politics or whatever else, I said, there's clearly something I'm missing here and I need to do a little work and figure out what it is. And, since that time, it's been my favorite 4 lacrosse years of my life. Like Give and Go has been birthed and I've coached all over the world. And, I found this great team. And like I said, a lot more fulfillment and just understanding why I'm chasing this, these awards so hard. So that was a big one. And then I'll give you another really short one, just as you mentioned hardship and the lacrosse community. And I just wanted to make reference to one of my first long Give and Go trips. I did 5 weeks through Europe by myself and ended up coaching 7-8 different clinics like along the way. And on my second day, I got woken up to a call from my sister, and she was in the ICU. Her husband had broken his spine and he was in really tough shape. I was in Budapest, by myself. And that was like a earth rattling kind of moment for me. And the lacrosse community from all over the world just showed up for me and for her in ways that I couldn't even describe. I mean, they, one of the first things I did was just kind of ask people in the lacrosse community to send my sister a DM, and tell her you're praying for her or whatever. And this was kind of my way of trying to be there for her when I was across the world. And it was like 500 DMs, like the entire LSU men's club team, all the Italian lacrosse players, like all these people that I had just met along the way, a bunch of guys from the Spain national team that I'd met coaching. So that, like right off the bat, it was like that day, 200 DMs into my sister, flooding my sister's inbox. And then it was just like act after act after act. I mean, Jerry Ragnice, calls and orders food to the hospital for her. Then a bunch of my teammates that I play in Hawaii on the Wimmer lacrosse team are showing up and spending some time with her. A lot of them live in San Diego. They end up donating a bunch of money to buy him a Peloton to help with his recovery. Just act after act after act of the lacrosse community showing up for me. And that was a big, like, clarity moment and why what we do with Give and Go is important. Like if we can invite other people into this community, and there's going to be times when they need it and they know they have this community to fall back on, like that in itself, I mean, forget gear and finance and everything else, that in itself can be really powerful. So those two things both came about a year apart, and I think really just helped to lead me on the path of what I'm doing now and believing in this stuff.
I love it because there's two stories of the interplay or interconnection from your individual hardship, and then that was a team or a community hardship, right? And that you guys were dealing with together. Some of the things that I was writing down as you were talking about your first experience there was the probability the outcome you want increases when you let go of the need to have it, right? That's a saying in the mental game that drives me every single day, right? Because we all want to get to the reward, we all want to win, we all want these certain outcomes, but the probability of getting it actually increases when you let go of the need to have it. So what does that mean? We got to focus on the things that are going to get you there. The accolades will come, right? You winning the humanitarian award had everything to do with how you carry yourself, your essence of you. the last thing about the first story that you gave us there was it's not what you get from it, it's who you become by it. That's so important, right? Because I had I have the privilege of hearing and working with a guy named Rich Ruffalo, and he is the all-time leader in Olympic medals as a blind athlete. And he won the gold medal in Berlin back in the day. And he says something that it's not how far you throw the javelin, it's what happens when the javelin lands. Right. So he's won the gold medal, but then what does he do with it? And he spent the rest of his life now being a motivational speaker. And there's so much power in that. One of the things that I think you can provide for our listeners is, say there's a young lacrosse player or a coach that's listened to us in this conversation. What are one or two pieces of advice you'd give them as they try to pursue a similar path that you did, right? As a lacrosse player, as a young coach, or as a leader, what are some things that you like to preach to those young individuals?
Yeah, so I'll give you two, and both are kind of mantras that at different times have just been so helpful and impactful for me, and so simple. And the first one is to trust yourself. And I work with a lot of kids who are going through the recruiting process, and that's to me like a great first place to kind of learn what to trust yourself means. I got that advice from my mom. I was committing to go to NAPS, to go to the Naval Academy Prep School. And I get this really late offer from Loyola. And I know in my heart right away, I want to go to Loyola. I didn't want to go to prep school. Frankly, like the idea of a military academy, I was only interested because I wanted to play lacrosse. It wasn't that I was super motivated by that career choice. But at the same time, my dad, and a lot of others around me just saw how, special playing at an academy can be. And I'll also mention it's free, and Loyola is far from free. So my dad's, pointing some of these things out to me, and I was really stressed. I didn't know what to do. Like, I knew what my heart wanted, but I didn't want to let him down. I didn't really know how to handle it. And my mom gives me this advice: just trust yourself. Like, at the end of the day, go with your gut. Right. And there's a million different ways to say that, but I think that was my first kind of introduction into what trusting your own intuition looks like and feels like. And so obviously I do, and I go to Loyola, and that turns out great. Well, then when I'm in New York and I'm working in banking and I want to quit to focus on playing lacrosse when they pay me $7,000 a year, and not to pick on my dad, but once again, he's kind of like, well, what are you doing? Like, why would you do this? You have a great job. Like, you should really think about it. And I didn't need my mom to tell me that time. I was like, you know what? Trust yourself. Like, this is another one of those moments where I need to just believe in what my gut feeling is telling me to do, and go for it. And again, that was another, really impactful decision in my life where those two words kind of just rang true. So I always tell people that, especially young people, it can be a lot harder, I think, when you're a high school kid and you're so heavily influenced by your parents and your coaches and everybody around you, your peers, to just remember that at the end of the day, like, you're the only one that you really need to answer to, and that, you have these gut feelings, you need to trust them and you need to go with it. And then the second one is I would just, something I always like to say is great minds are open, and just being open-minded, and that's something that I just have been reminded through lacrosse over and over and over again, that, like, just when you think you know what's best, you probably don't. So, kind of always assuming that you don't know what's best, and being open to try new things. And like, this happens in lacrosse all the time. I mean, Coach Resch wants us to play man down defense differently than I've ever played in my life. So I could resist, and I could say, well, why this? Or I could say, oh, maybe I'll actually be better playing like this. And, so that kind of goes back to the ego thing, I think, a little bit. But a lot of great athletes, you just get so set in your ways of what got you there. And so I would just give that advice, and same thing to coaches, of just remember that there's always probably a better way. And so just to kind of constantly check your ego in that manner, and remind yourself to stay open-minded and trust that maybe somebody else has something they can teach you or show you or try differently. That's really allowed me, I think, to continue to evolve as a player, and been really helpful for me.
Awesome, Scott. I was talking to one of my best friend, and I was telling him kind of give me feedback, kind of talk to me about what he's seeing in my life. I thought it was great to have an accountability partner like that. And topic that came up was how I bet on myself the same way you did, right? I had an offer to go play football and lacrosse at Williams, and my whole family said, take it.
Yep.
And I ended up going to prep school because I wanted to play Division I lacrosse, and that was me trusting myself. And he has me writing about when should you bet on yourself, and a lot of life comes down to a 4-letter word of risk, right? You go out in your car, you're taking a risk, but then there's some times where you got to take that high risk that seems like for other people that is a huge risk, but to you, when you bet on yourself and you know what you have from a skill set perspective, and especially from a passion perspective, that's when you should trust yourself. Definitely. The great minds are open leads me right into my next question. Jordan B. Peterson wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life, and one of them is assume the person you're speaking to knows something that you don't. And I think that's really powerful because there's a lot of people. We talked about ego earlier. Dr. Gilbert, who I work with, makes this pie chart, and he goes 20, 20, 60, and 20% of the things that we know, 20% of the things that we don't know, and then 60% is we don't know that we don't know. Right. And that's what is really powerful by you saying great minds are open. And I want listeners to have their mind open as I ask this next question to you. One of the most impressive aspects about your journey is that you've had not missed one game in your 8 pro seasons. What do you attribute that consistency to? And can you dive a little bit into your training process? Because I know your words pack a punch because you carry yourself in a manner that allows you to do so from an authenticity standpoint. One of my favorite quotes is, you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. And you do a great job of that because of your training, your passion, your empathy, and all that. So could you give our listeners where your consistency comes from and what your training regimen looks like?
Yeah. So once again, the consistency, I don't think I was consciously aware of it, but my dad never missed a day of school from kindergarten through college. So, I hear stories of that, and like right away, I think and now I missed a ton of school. So I did not accomplish the classroom consistency that he had, but I do think obviously just having that example set right off the bat. And then the other thing is he grew up in Georgia and moved to Maryland when he was a freshman in high school. But he I never was much of a baseball fan, but he raised me on Cal Ripken Jr. and, the Iron Man. And so that was definitely one of my idols. And I just always saw and as the cliche, but how can you be the best if you're not available? So I always just viewed it that way of you can't miss games. You have to be at practice. You have to be at games. If you want to be the best player, you've got to be available. So I think I always had that, desire to be that Iron Man guy in me. But the thing that's allowed it to come to fruition is certainly just the training and the preparation. And I'm really grateful for where I'm from for that. I started working with a trainer, in 8th, 9th grade. And she was, the place was full of NFL Pro Bowlers. And that's just the culture here in Atlanta is there's, a ton of these combine trainers and of these, NFL, NBA trainers. A lot of these athletes live in Atlanta in the off season. And so they exist all over the place. And I had Ray Lewis, Jamal Lewis, a bunch of these Ravens guys, Takeo Spikes working out in the sandpit outside my high school when I was in 9th grade during weight training class. So I got introduced into that world at a really young age and just fell in love with it, right? It became, we talk so much about it, but part of my community. And I got to surround myself with guys that I looked up to athletically and watched how they trained. And so that's just always been a huge part of my life is it's not just the training that I'm doing at Loyola with my team or whatever. I'm also have always gone to trainers on my own and identified my weaknesses. My high school football coach used to call me a giant slow twitch muscle fiber. I was a cross country runner and I was in great shape, but I was not fast at all. And here I am wanting to play midfield, a college midfield. So instead of taking it personally, I just recognized okay, this is a weakness. Here's these incredible trainers that can teach me how to get faster and more flexible and all these things. And I think the byproduct of that was it's how you stay healthy. I got into it to try to get fast, but it became this focus on flexibility and mobility and things that you're seeing now really catching on for a lot of people. I've just been doing it forever. And so I think that's a big part of why I was able to, and still am able to stay healthy is, I just put a ton of time into that part of my game and of my body and making sure that I was prepared for the environments I was going into. And as I've gotten older, that consistency that I've developed and the habit of training every single day has evolved, right? And now I put a lot of that energy into my diet and into my recovery. And where I used to maybe go to the gym for an hour, get a workout in and go home. Now I'm there 40 minutes before the workout. I'm rolling out. I'm, doing a little extra mobility, extra stretching. And then I'm finishing the workout. I'm getting in the ice bath. I'm sitting in the hot tub. So it's really just evolved from, when you're young and you can just push yourself to, as you get a little bit older, starting to put some of that time and energy into just staying healthy. Right. And so like, that was something that I did about 2 off seasons ago now, was just completely changed my diet, stopped eating out, dedicated more time to preparing my meals. And then also just replacing a little bit of the hardcore working out and training with recovery type of exercises and things like that. And I think the last piece of it, and leave it with this, is just, it was also a mindset. When I left a banking job that was paying me really well and had this, potential to set me up for life financially, it was like, okay, if I'm doing this, I'm going all in. And all in to me means you don't miss practice, you don't miss games. And something that used to just drive me crazy was guys who would miss games for a wedding or for coaching their high school team. And I was always really vocal about that in the MLL, that, to each their own, but you're not going to catch me doing that. Like, somebody that is important enough in my life for me to be in their wedding, it's not going to be on a game weekend, or else I'm not going to be there. And that's come back to bite me. My high school team made the state championship game, and I skipped it for a regular season Blaze game in Dallas. And we ended up losing that state championship game by 1 goal to a team that we had beaten pretty handedly early in the season. And that was hard. And I felt so bad for my guys. But they understood. I mean, when I took the job, I stood in front of them and said, look, this is my priority, and I'm here coaching you guys because I want to play, and I want to set an example for you guys of what commitment looks like. And so they knew from the beginning that if that situation ever came up, what my decision would be. Still didn't make it any easier. And then, our first PLL season, I was going to be the best man in one of my childhood friends' wedding. And it was the same day as our week 3 game in Chicago. And I skipped his wedding for that. And unfortunately, lost a little bit of a relationship there because of it. And it sucks and it's painful to go through, but and he understands to a certain extent, but just that same thing where it was like, look, dude, if I didn't treat it this way, I wouldn't be here, Right. And I made a full on 100% mental commitment to this, and I just can't break that. I won't feel right with myself if I do. And I'll resent you and your wedding for it. And so I ultimately I've had to make some of those tough decisions, but I think that's part of it. I mean, skipping games isn't just about staying healthy in our sport. It's also about having this mental commitment that this is my priority above all else, even if it's not paying us millions of dollars. I just thought it's be, do, have. If we ever want to be what the NFL has, we need guys who are going to treat it that way first. Right. And if more and more guys treat it that way, then I think that's how we can build it into, this full-time career that so many of us want.
Yeah. And I think what comes to mind is our biggest strength is definitely our biggest weakness, right? Your level of commitment. Obviously, you have to abandon other things in life, right? And that's just the way it is. The number one decision we'll ever make in our life is, are you going to go all out or are you going to hold back? And that's not 99%. That's everything, right? That's from a mindset perspective. Something you're talking about when staying healthy and pay those little victories inside your training regimen. I always talk about we are in control of our performance, right? Showing up on time, putting full effort, focus, but we are not always in control of our health, right? You've had an uncle that had cancer. I've had a mother that had cancer. She since beat it, which is amazing. But the whole point here is if you control your performance, you're giving your best shot at a byproduct of good health. And then the third thing is you talked about your environment and being around NFL Pro Bowlers. I mean, there's a book called Bounce. It's a ping pong book about how at one point, the top ping pong players in the world all came from the same street. And what that had to do with was the fact that they were all using the same open table and playing against each other from the same coach. And you really are a product of your environment. A more lighthearted question, but still has the same kind of idea inside the environment, is growing up, who are some of your biggest role models inside sports or otherwise? And now, what players inside of our Premier Lacrosse League are guys that you really respect, and why?
Yeah, great. No, great question. I was wondering, I love ping pong. I was like, is that street Trevor Court? Because I was pretty nice back in the day growing up. Me and my buddies would have some wild tournaments. So I'll have to check that one out. But Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So one thing that I would point out about a lot of these gym guys that I work out with, and again, it's across now. It's really there's MLB, NBA, NFL, the occasional soccer players in there, but you can always tell who the ones who are year 7, year 8 successful players. Like some of the most talented ones are first, second year guys, but like there's these little things like, finish your rep, jog and touch that wall. And they stop 4 or 5 yards short of the wall. And then myself and the 2 guys who are in year 8 go all the way and touch the wall. And it's just like, I always point it out to them. I'm like, look around. You got guys like Eric Berry and Casey Hayward who made multiple Pro Bowls in here, not skipping a single step. And then you've got another dude who may be bigger, stronger, faster, who is bouncing around getting cut by teams. And it's not because of your physical fitness, right? And
one of the things I want to say, just continue, is I saw that the average career span is just over 3 years. It goes up to 11.7, right? It goes up to 11.7 if you make one Pro Bowl. And that has everything to do with those 4 yards of touching the wall. Sorry for cutting you off.
No problem. So yeah, I just point that out because I think, and I'm going to get into some of those influences, but I think like just seeing that in itself was like, has always been a teacher for me. Like I look at the difference in behaviors between the guys, and I don't even know a lot of these guys, but between the guys who have had these long successful careers and the guys who seem to be struggling. And it's really not that complicated to figure out what's different about the way that they approach it. But for people in particular in my sports life, in high school, I thought I was a really good athlete. I was, by my senior year, I was dominating lacrosse in Georgia. I was definitely one of the better basketball players at our school as well. But I wasn't even like in people's conscious as being like the best athlete in the school. We had a kid, Glenn Rice Jr., who went on to play at Georgia Tech and in the NBA. We had multiple guys that had made it all the way to the MLB and played in the big leagues there. We had several football players. A guy named Chase Thomas was somebody I started training with at a young age, who was a captain at Stanford football in the Andrew Luck days. He played outside linebacker and he was on the 49ers for a while. So like I was just surrounded at my high school by top level athletes across all sports. So I always had them to kind of keep me humble and push me to be great. And again, just this demonstration of what that looked like. But I think specifically for me, the first guy that comes to mind is Dorsey Levens. Dorsey was a running back for the Green Bay Packers for 12, 13 years. Their one Super Bowl year, he was a Pro Bowler, and he's in the Packers Hall of Fame. And I got connected with him when I moved back to Atlanta, kind of randomly. He was, he had trained with my trainer Lily back in the day. So I used to see him, like I mentioned, at my high school. He was one of those guys that would be out there training. And he came into to LB3 Lacrosse Club, and he was like, "Hey, I'm doing a training business," and he was working with Lily a little bit, and I'd love to see if we can't get some of your kids out. And I kind of negotiated that into, well, how about you train me, and I'll help pump some kids your guys' way. And so him and I started working together, and this was that first year that I moved home from Atlanta, and he taught me an awful lot about mindset. And so the training was the same stuff I had done my whole life. He was accountability, and he was putting me through these workouts that I really, at this point, could teach him myself. I've been doing them for so long, but obviously having that accountability partner is really huge. But what he started doing for me was really tapping into the mental part. He gave me his book, Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life, by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And, we would go do these trail runs, and every time we'd get to the pond, he would have some, nature parable or anecdote about living your best life. And he used to do this thing called positive thinking triggers, where he would attach a thought to different things we would see out in the trails. And like you saw a hawk, he would point it out. Remember, you control your own thoughts. You saw a heron. Hey, remember to be patient. Like let the river feed you. Like he just started teaching me all these like little tidbits, and it were things that he really loved and believed in and had helped him. And so that was like where this fusing of the mindset side and the physical athletic side came. So he was a huge mentor and inspiration for me in those early years, while I developed a lot of these habits that are kind of shining through with where I'm at now. And then as far as in our league goes, there's obvious answers. Brody Merrill is the first name that comes to mind. I got a chance to play with him in 2015 and was just blown away by his brand of leadership and his toughness and his consistency. And I talk about like the way we treat it and taking this thing seriously. And I think for me, he was like a great example of what that really looks like to commit to this sport and to the success as a team and to winning. So he's somebody that I greatly admire. But really, I think you can go up and down these rosters. I mean, it's just so fun about playing at this level is there's so many guys out here that I really admire and I really look up to for different reasons. You know, Kyle Harrison, the way that he has engaged in the community and inclusion and diversity specifically is something that has been really inspiring to me, and something that I think that he does so well that I look up to is he's just so authentically himself. And it just oozes off of him. You know, you can just tell he's not doing things for social media or for other people. He's being himself, and he's got this platform because of how awesome of a person he is. So I really look up and admire him. And then, you know, it wouldn't be right if I didn't point out my two co-captains on the Archers. I mean, Marcus Holman and Tom Schreiber, who are obviously guys who are my age or younger. There's something very specific about both of them that, you know, I really, really admire. You know, Tom is the hardest working player I've ever played with. And, you know, I'm the type who's like, I'm always the first guy on the field, the last guy off the field. I can truly say I have not stayed on the field longer than Tom one time in 2 years playing with him. The guy, I mean, he is the last one on the field shooting every time. And it's such a cliche, but with him, it is just so true. He's not, you know, super vocal, rah type of guy, but he demonstrates, you know, the type of commitment it takes to be as good as he is. And, you know, he does it every single practice. You know, and then I think with Marcus, the thing that I admire so much is, you know, one is zero fear with being himself. You know, he is a really vocal leader, but he's very authentic with it. And he has no fear of speaking up and of setting a standard and being a tone setter. It doesn't matter what locker room he's in. I've seen him, you know, at Team USA events, or whether it's all the Archers, he's going to put himself out there and he's going to be himself and he's going to set the standard in that way. And then I think number two with him, and it goes back to it with Tom also, but he's just incredibly consistent, you know, as a friend, as a teammate. You know what you're going to get out of Marcus every single time. You know he's going to work his butt off. He's one of the mentally toughest guys I've been around. Like, if things aren't going his way, you don't even notice. And you know this, Mark, as well as I do. Like, that is really rare in our league, like, and in any pro league. If you're not having individual success, most of the other people on your team can feel it. And it's hard not to let, again, that little bit of selfishness that's probably healthy, that helps us get here. It's hard to not let that seep in through the team. And, you know, Marcus, I think this PLL bubble was a perfect example. Like, wasn't finding the net, you know, wasn't having his best performance, but you didn't even have to think twice about him mentally. And he was not bringing any sort of negative energy or doubt into the locker room environment whatsoever. And that's because he's put a lot of work in on the mental part of the game, and just like yourself and like I try to be. I mean, he reads a lot about it. He studies, he's mindful, he writes, he meditates on things. And so he's prepared for when adversity hits. It's the same Marcus. You get the same level of consistency. So, you know, I try to look at every guy I play with and pick something from them that I can kind of emulate and take upon myself. But yeah, I guess those four, Marcus and Tom and Kyle and Brody, are four guys that I really admire and look up to.
I love that. And I obviously, Tom goes without saying, you know, as a short stick defensive midfielder, that questions and answer is always the same. Who's the hardest guy to cover? And it's always Tom. And it's because he works hard and he has little to no weaknesses in his game. Marcus Holman, after our championship series, I had to write him and told him that I love to compete against him. Right. I'm not close friends with him, but I just love what he represents. You know, there's a Sanskrit word, Shaktipad, exchange of energy. Every time you walk into a room, is your energy worth catching or avoiding? Is something to know, right? Totally. Because you use words like oozing, right? You use picking up, these things that you're feeling from these guys that I couldn't agree more with. Kyle Harrison went from a role model to a very close friend that I text weekly with now. And then Brody Merrill, I was going to bring it up earlier, but I'm going to say it now. You were talking about the missing of the weddings thing. I was having that conversation with Brody. I've been a long-time teammate with him now. And he said, I've only missed one game. And we lost that game, and it was for my buddy, and they're now divorced, and I'll never do that again, right? So it was exactly. a funny thing in terms of Brody Merrill's commitment and toughness and consistency. Couldn't agree more. Now this next one, go ahead.
Sorry to circle back on that. You know, that was a learning process for me too, where when I did that and skipped, you know, one of my best friend's weddings, I learned a lot also, because I think I was a little surprised by how much, I mean, everybody I asked in my life including a lot of guys that played, were saying skip the game. And that was like surprising to me. And I almost like, it was a little bit of a learning moment where I was like, look, I need to make sure I'm not like devaluing a wedding, because I'm just saying like, look, it's one day. Like we can go, I'll take you and your wife out and we'll go spend a weekend at the lake together and we'll have deep conversation. And like, in my mind, like, perfect, that works. Like, because that's how maybe I would treat it. But I have to realize that, you know, for others, it can feel different. It can mean different things. And so if I did have regret from it, it would just be around not the decision I made, but the way I handled it, and just like not honoring. And this goes back to that great minds are open kind of statement of like, just because I'm so sure of this is right for me doesn't mean that I shouldn't still be able to hear out and understand what this means or feels like to somebody else. So it's like a complicated, you know, issue, because it is an 100%. Important day, and, you know, you do want to be there for the people in your life. And so that's where I think some of that learning for me came, was just like, again, I'm still very much of the belief that I made the right decision, but the process I went to get there and the way I communicated it, I probably would have changed and tried to be a little bit more thoughtful and open to, you know, how much this day means to somebody else, even though I don't necessarily, again, it's not that I don't think it's important. It's just, I struggle with that thought of like, one day defines a friendship or relationship. So
Sure.
no,
and I agree with you. You know, I've struggled with that a lot. You know, Nick Saban says this thing where, and I'm by no means calling your friends or anybody here mediocre versus peak performer. I'm just saying that you have to be able to see eye to eye and have a certain level of understanding, because Nick Saban says like the mediocre and the peak performer don't see eye to eye because they have different goals, right? And I think when I think about that, what you're going through in that story, that weighs me down more than anything else, is missing the important person's shindig, you know, and it really can't be defined in a day. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to wrap it up with a couple more questions here. When you are studying or researching or working on your craft off the field with leadership, are there any books or resources that you particularly turn to that are very influential?
Well, yeah. So I'm going to plug right here. My mom has a book, Leadership Through Trust and Collaboration, that it actually just came out. It's on Amazon. And, you know, the truth, Mark, is like 80 to 90% of the things I learn and teach, I've learned directly from her. And so, you know, I do love to read, and I could start spitting out books, but my interest in reading actually leans a little bit more towards fiction. Like I mentioned, The Alchemist, like I like reading about books that are about the experience of life, but I think I have kind of this creative side in me that loves like a story, and I seem to resonate more with those books who tell it in the story, as opposed to a lot of those like nonfiction or self-help type books, although I have read, you know, 50, 100 of those also. But I learned the most about developing as a person and a leader when I work with my mom. And, you know, she does the executive coaching and she runs workshops in the corporate space. And as often as I can, I go and I support her and I work with her, and we meet, you know, bi-weekly and just kind of talk about like, what are some of the tools you're teaching, or what are new things you picked up? And she is a serial, I mean, she's got thousands of books on leadership and personal development. She's, you know, she's certified in every single like personality test that there's ever been. You know, she worked in culture and human resources for her entire career. So she's implemented so many different like leadership programs. So she has this like wealth of knowledge on all of them. And, you know, when I was getting into this, I used to talk to her about like, you know, should I go to grad school and get a master's in leadership and this and that. And she was just like, you don't need to, just start living it, you know, start doing it. Just start. You're a professional athlete. You're in one of the high performance businesses on earth. Like start taking the things you're reading about and learning and talking to me about and apply them to yourself. And then you're qualified to teach them. Right. So she's always like been that for me as like kind of that primary teacher. And a lot of like the basics around what I teach and what I do, she spells out in her book. So that would be the one that I would love to point people towards. And sorry, I think the second part of your question.
No, that's perfect. And I think if there's any young listeners, I try to stress it because I know it's changed my life, is the role of mentors in my life as a young adult, right? I think the same way a child needs a parent, young adults need mentors. And that's between you and you. You go and finding your passion and your skill set, what you want to learn, and going, right? Somebody once said, the great minds are open. I forget who said that.
There you go.
That's definitely true.
And, you know, it's hard from your mom. Like, and I'm going to take up 4 hours of your time. You can cut this if you want.
Oh.
But my introduction into leadership and personal development was my first season coaching, I coach at a school called GAC, Greater Atlanta Christian. And we struggled. We lose this big region game midway through the season. And my mom's coming to the game and she's kind of watching. And finally she sits down. She's like, hey, I'm like starting this like leadership consulting business. I think I've got some stuff that'll help your team. I'm 23. I'm in my first year as a head coach. I'm like, no way, Mom. Like, you're not coming and talking to my team. Like, that's ridiculous. My first guest speaker is going to be my mom. And so I pushed back on her. Year 2, we end up losing like the same region game, same part of the season in kind of a similar fashion. And again, my mom's in my ear. Let me come talk to your team. I've got a skill. I want to teach. It can help. I need 10 minutes. She's like, give me 8 minutes, Scott, 8 minutes. I'm like, okay, all right. Like, I'm starting to get a little more secure in myself. I'm like, all right, you can come talk to him, 8 minutes. She comes down, she teaches this skill, rapid rebound. Really simple. Jordan Spieth had a collapse at the Masters that year. And she used kind of that collapse and she explained how, when we make one mistake, how one mistake can compound into multiple mistakes if we're not able to kind of quickly shift our focus forward, and specifically looking at what adjustments to make going forward. Because if we're thinking about change and adjustments, we're not thinking back into uncontrollable, unchangeable circumstances. And so the rest of the season, like, my kids just like grasped on to this concept of rapid rebound. And like, we'd be in huddles and I'd hear 3 different kids, rapid rebound when the other team goes on a run. And so that was like this aha moment where, like, after that season, I call my mom. I'm like, boom, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to teach. Like, get me set up. And then she had the wherewithal to say, why don't you learn from Dr. Jill? Because she knew that for me to really learn and understand this work, I was going to need to dive into, my deepest insecurities, my relationship issues, all this other stuff. And she was able to kind of see, like, it's probably going to feel a little easier for him to do this with somebody else first. And now it's at this point where we speak this common language and I'm an open book to her and her back to me. And it's really helped our relationship grow, but it's not easy always to see your parents in that light. Obviously I think a lot of people admire them and look up to them, but that was important for me to just kind of be like, hey, look, like, she's got some more things to teach me here that I haven't learned yet. And I need to be open and to taking that chance and learning from her. So definitely, yeah, her mentorship and again, her book, which tells a lot of this kind of story, has been really impactful for me.
Absolutely. Leadership through trust and collaboration. If you're
That's
listening.
That's it.
I was just watching the Masters yesterday and I was enthralled by Dustin Johnson's composure, right? He bogeyed back to back in the front 9. I'm like, wow, what's going to happen next, right? Yep. This is going to be a picture of sports psych right here, right now. This is perhaps a tougher question. And one of the last questions is there anything inside the realms of performance, coaching, leadership, training that you feel is a myth, something that's really misunderstood or taught incorrectly? Some examples are like the role like sleep plays on recovery, right? Me being an avid Whoop wearer now, I'm seeing that it's so important. Back in the day, hydration, right? It was said, no, you don't need water at practice. Obviously, that's been demythed and Gatorade exists now. Understanding the difference between management versus leadership. But what in your mind is something that's misunderstood in the coaching or performance realm?
Yeah, great question. So 2 things. I got 2 things for you. One I've been on a lot recently, and that's just that the most important attribute you can have to have success in any sport is your mind. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to go outside of just like the mental toughness thing, but the ability to think while you play, and I say this because, again, I look at a lot of these guys I train with who are 5 times more athletic than some of the ones who perform on the field. And when you dive in and you talk to them about it, and I think the same thing applies to me. I don't think I'm by any stretch of the imagination the biggest, strongest, fastest dude out there, but I know where to be, right? And I can, in a game, I can be guarding one person here and I can hear a voice, coming from the other side of the field, and I can register what that voice is telling me to do and react really quickly and do it. And I think that goes across all sports, is your ability to think while you play is massively important, right? And you could be the greatest athlete on earth, but if you have that lag between listening and reacting, or you don't have that ability to understand what the offense or the defense is attempting to do, it's going to be really hard for you to ever be the best. And of course, the really great, really special ones kind of have both, I think.
Sure.
But I don't, I haven't, and maybe this is a project for you, like I haven't mastered on how you teach that and practice that. One thing I talk to my kids a lot about is like paying attention in line in a drill. And when you start your rep, knowing who's in the drill, what is their strong hand? What is most likely going to happen here? Where do I need to be? And like, so thinking ahead of a lot of those things to me is an effective way to practice that.
Well, if I can plug the strategy real quickly, and I wanted to hear number two, and I can't wait for it, is you're onto something when you're saying think while you play, but the very, very best do it so rapidly that they're not even thinking, it just reaction. Right. But then the thing that the way you teach it is you got to make sure, and I say it with training, you have to have the 3 eyes. You have to be have a certain level of intensity, intention, and importance in what you're doing, or else you're teaching yourself the wrong way of doing something. Bingo. And if you stay in that conscious, competent state where you know what you're doing right or wrong, and you're working on it so repeatedly in training, that allows you to have an unconscious competence in the game where you're reacting. So you teach it in training so that you can kind of just react in the game. And I love that.
That's exactly right. Right. Finding, the flow state, as they say, and it comes from that, and that's something my mom used to always talk about as well, is like you think so much more effectively when you're asleep and you're dreaming, because your conscious isn't, there to clog you down. Exactly. So right. It certainly is that. And so like that ability, and I just see it like even, with guys that we play with now, you have some really good players who have all the physical tools, but still aren't quite able to get over that hump just because there's something missing in that ability to just kind of understand what's happening and, put yourself in the right spot. Like you could be a step slower, but if I'm a half a second quicker to realize where I have to go, I'm still going to beat you to the ball. Right. So not only like training the physical side, but really like learning how to prepare in a way that allows you to play in that flow state. Like that to me is under taught and under stressed. I think especially with young people, it's just like get bigger, stronger, faster. But it's especially in our sport, that's just not necessarily the case. That would be probably the I don't know if that's really a myth, but the main thing that I've been like thinking about and focusing on as far as peak performance goes. Tell you the truth, Mark, I lost my train of thoughts on the other one. No
worries. I hope you can come up with this next question. Like you progressed from a young player to a national champion college and now a veteran pro player. Obviously the best question I can ask you is what's something you know now that you wish you knew as a younger student athlete or a rookie in the league? It's something that you kind of do right now. Maybe it can be even just one thing. It could be nutrition. It could be hydration. It could sleep. What is the one thing that you wish you knew when you were first starting off as a young pro or younger student athlete?
Yeah. So that's a really good question. There's obviously a lot of things that come and go, but the first thing that jumps into my mind is it comes back to like my relationship with my ego. And so I don't know how to state it as like a one singular thing, but I think that what I wish I could have known earlier was just how powerful it would be when, learning how to kind of manage your ego in a way that allows you to put, the team and winning above anything else. And I think that right, I win the championship my junior year of college. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, like I'm going to win forever. Right. And here I am in my 8th year of pro lacrosse. And I've won 2 playoff games essentially, and haven't even been to a championship again. And I think that early in my lacrosse career, I wish that I had recognized like that I was stunting my ability to be a winner with my desire to kind of chase individual goals. And like, I don't think that anybody is outwardly intentionally selfish in pro lacrosse or any pro sport, but I don't think we all understand that just how at times egotistical we can be because of what we're allowing to motivate us. Right. And so I look at like my years with the Atlanta Blaze and I'm just like, I was not focused on the right things. And I think that, we had 3 really tough losing seasons. And I think that, Adam Gittleman and I are so close because we've been through quite a bit together. This being one of those things, I think both him and I got really caught up in, and he would be the first to admit it, just like I would. We got really caught up in ourselves and our own achievements in some of those years in Atlanta, as opposed to just what can we do to empower the players around us. And the late coach Dave Huntley was somebody who like changed my life in a lot of ways. And, he was the first person to just sit me down and say it to me really frankly. He's like, look, the difference between you and Brody, you're both really good, but what makes Brody great is he cares more about the success of the people around him than he does about the success of himself. And at the time, I remember Matt Hosick was my backup LSM. And I'm in this egotistical thing where it's like, I can take every run of a game. I'm in such good shape. I don't get tired. I don't need to take breaks. And I was in pretty damn good shape, but like his point was like, what are you doing to empower Matt? You know, when you're not even willing to take a run off to give it to him, what is that? Like, even if you're not tired, you showing that trust in him, we could get 2 or 3 plays a game out of him that will come from your belief and your empowerment. And again, it's not like I was trying to, you know, I've always been, I think, a really positive teammate and like was verbally encouraging, but Coach Huntley was like, some of the things you do are selfish. And so he was like, if you can learn to like check that ego and to start to care more about Matt Hossack's success and his ground ball numbers than your own, because he's like, Rat, you're good. You're already good. Like, stop trying to prove how good you are and start trying to fucking win. Right. Yeah. And so that lesson, I heard it when Coach Huntley said it to me, because this was his magic. He didn't mince words. He looked me in the face like, oh yeah, you're fucking selfish, bud. Like, you know, like he was like right there with it. Right. And I was so appreciative of that. And I had played with Brody and I experienced what he described, like where Brody stopped playing LSM and let me play there, you know, but encouraged me there and was in my ear all season and just completely changed his role, which allowed me to have the best season of my life. So like I had seen the demonstration that he was talking about. And I think it took me a year or two to really understand that. I would go as far as to say like this bubble might've been the first time in my career that I think I fully felt that, where I was just detached completely from my own personal results. And, you know, something I was excited to share with you, Mark, is I jumped in front of a shot at the end of the Chrome game. Ned was up at the midline, had to take a last second shot, and I'm in the huddle and I was like, I'm just going to eat this. And to tell you the truth, man, like that's not something I used to do, you know, and I would be the first one to be halfway breaking up the field, looking to get a fast break when somebody's winding up to shoot. And I got over to the sideline and Coach Resch was smiling at me. He was like, I don't know if the old Rat would have done that. And it was just a really cool moment for me. And obviously I think it speaks to just the example that you've set for so many people. Like I saw a college girl jump in front of a shot and on Instagram this week, I'm like, man, he has really changed the game. But I just think that speaks to, you know, again, for me, it was just like, I'd reached this point of truly putting my teammates in front of myself, and it felt good. And I felt like I played better. And that's like the big lesson is like, if you can just commit to it and really lose ego, it's ultimately going to work, you know, in your favor. It's going to make you better in the long run and more likely to win, which is really what, you know, the end goal is.
I love it, man. And thank you so much for the vulnerability and talking about that growth and the self-discovery. That was so amazing. You know, one of the words that I'm like totally enthralled with in today's day and age is empowerment. I think the quote that comes to mind, and I'm going to paraphrase it, is that when a leader's work is said and done, his team is able to say we did it ourselves. And right. Yeah. And that means that the leader just gets out of the way. I mean, through your combination of what you do on top of the messages that you spread and the good vibes you inject into this world, I mean, you cover both bases of this podcast. That's why I wanted to have you on the gratitude side of it. And the full of greatness well on your way. In your opinion, what is greatness or what does it mean to you? What does it look like to you? And how do you define greatness?
Yeah, I think it's ever changing. So, you know, to me, I think that my version of greatness has just been a commitment to being the best version of myself that I can possibly be. And to understanding that is a never ending work in progress. So something that I talk a lot about is change. You know, my mom used to always say, if you don't like change, you don't like life. And, you know, I do believe that I have greatness in me and that I've done a lot of great things and reached that point, but I never reach them if I'm not willing to look at the mirror and change things about myself. Like, you know, I've discussed my relationship with my ego or whatever it was, this willingness to take a deep dive into personal development and inner work. And, you know, I look at my path through my adult life, through the last 7 years, I'm a completely different person than I was when I was 23, 24. And I know that I'm going to be again when I'm 32 or 33, because that is life. So I think greatness is just this willingness to continue to learn, to continue to explore, and to continue to change. And I think, you know, when you do that, I think what happens with a lot of people is they run into this wall and they finally meet a wall they can't run through. And instead of changing and going left or going right and going around it, they get stuck. And wow. So something I try to teach to my young people all the time is, you know, not every single goal is going to be notched off along the way, but you've got to be willing to just make adjustments, make changes, go around it, and keep pushing forward. And I think when you do that, you can reach levels of greatness. And I got to shout out to my guy, Drew Snyder. One of our favorite quotes we always share with each other is, what do you do when things aren't going right? You go left. right? And I always try to remind myself that if something's not going right, like take a left, do something different, find a change to make in your life, change a habit, change an environment, change a relationship. And I think when you're willing to do that, you can get to your version of greatness, at least.
I love that, man. I'm going to steal that. If you don't like change, you don't like life.
Yeah, it's good.
Because life is change. I love that. You're awesome, man. I really appreciate our relationship. I can't wait for us to get even closer as the years and days go on. Where can listeners follow and connect with you? I mean, you're a keynote speaker, you're an online coach, you work with people in terms of leadership and personal development. Where can listeners follow or connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So, the best place is just social media. I'm SRAT2 on Twitter and Scott Ratliff 2 on Instagram. I haven't been quite as active on Twitter recently. I'm in the midst of just a little bit of a break, I think, from social media as everybody needs from time to time. But those are great places. And then I think that the place to connect with me really is through GiveGo. GiveGo Fund on Instagram, and our website is GiveGo Fund as well. You can see all the great work we're doing there. That's something that, I'm putting a lot of my time and energy into right now is some of the new initiatives we've got with that. And then, I'm also branching out into the realm of writing poetry, Mark. So if
Awesome.
we have any fans that like reading poetry, you can bump over to my Instagram page. I've been sharing there and exploring that creative side of myself a little bit as well. So that's where I'm at these days.
I love that. When I was going through really, really dark times in high school, working out was one of my outlets, but writing poetry was the other. I don't think a lot of my listeners know that, but writing poetry, how euphoric is that? And I want to look at and check out all your work. Again, thank you so much for your vulnerability. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate our relationship, Scott.
Yeah, appreciate you. Likewise, buddy.